Good morning and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar, The Dark Side of Gambling, Casinos, Cryptocurrency, and Financial Crime. My name is Allison Owen, and I am an Associate Fellow at the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI. My job today is to moderate this discussion. So over the next hour, we will discuss emerging financial threats linked to the casino and gaming sector. I want to start on time because there's a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we also have time towards the end of the discussion to speak about possible next steps for mitigating the associated risk along with the emerging threats. Before diving into the conversation, I first want to speak about the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI, for those of you who might not be as familiar with the center. The Center for Finance and Security focuses on analysis and actionable ideas aimed to challenge the status quo and build resilience in the global response to illicit finance. This work is examined across two primary areas. First, by focusing on the development and implementation of effective anti-financial crime policies globally. And second, through an analysis of sanctions, state threats, and economic security. I want to note that the Center for Finance and Security will have its 10th anniversary soon. And to celebrate this event, the center will hold a big conference in London in February 2025. If you would like to learn more information about this event or keep up with RUSI research, I encourage all attendees to follow the Center for Finance and Security on LinkedIn and to sign up for the center's newsletter, which you can find at rusi.org/CFS. Now, I want to shift gears to the webinar today. First, I want to mention to the attendees, please do feel welcome to write questions into the chat. We are using the Q&A function on Zoom today, and I will make sure to moderate the Q&A function so I can get those questions to the speakers as quickly as possible. If we don't get to your question today, I do want to say, please do feel welcome to reach out to the Center for Finance and Security, and we could provide you with helpful resources. I will make sure to give you the contact email towards the end of the webinar today if that is the case. We have a great selection of experts today joining us to speak about the topic. First, I would like to introduce Chandana Seshadri, a research analyst at RUSI's Center for Finance and Security. Chandana's research focuses on counter-proliferation finance threats and analysis of associated risk exposure in the non-banking sector. She has supported RUSI's counter-proliferation finance workshops in 12 jurisdictions, providing an overview of proliferation finance threats, sanctions evasion typologies, and risk mitigation strategies. Next, we have BC Tan, the Southeast Asia Managing Director for Kroll Investigations, Diligence, and Compliance. BC has worked on organized crime, illicit finance, and sanctions topics for 20 years, and has recently taken on a particular interest in uncovering illicit networks linked to forced scamming, building on previous investigative work on the nexus between organized crime and junkets. Last but not least, we have Sam Cooper on the panel. Sam is a Canadian investigative journalist and author, specializing in anti-corruption and coverage of transnational illicit finance and hostile state interference networks. Sam started his career with newspapers in British Columbia, including the Vancouver Sun, and then worked for the Global News National Investigations Unit based in Ottawa. Finally, in 2023, Sam founded The Bureau, an investigative platform covering international anti-corruption and geopolitical matters. Thank you all for being with us here today, and I really think this is going to be a very impactful conversation. Sam, if you don't mind, I would like to start with you by asking if you could help set the scene for us. You have an extensive background looking into emerging threats around the casino and gaming sector. So what has your research shown you over the last few years regarding these threats and links to organized crime groups?
First, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today, and I'll take you, the audience, through a very brief timeline. Yes, I started in Vancouver, really started to delve into the world of casinos and underground banking around 2015, and I think 2016, 2017 is when I sort of, as a mainstream journalist, introduced to at least the western part of Canada how diasporic underground community banking has essentially infiltrated a major portion of a Western economy. So I think that was fairly groundbreaking. An Australian professor noticed my reporting at the Vancouver Sun and dubbed it the Vancouver model of money laundering. And as most of our audience knows today, this is a worldwide model now. And so the basics, of course, in mainland China, under the Communist Party, the citizens can only export 50,000 US dollars per year. And so to get around that, anyone that has developed a big chunk of wealth in China needs to go to a triad broker, essentially. So this is an underground banker, and wealthy patrons from China can tap into that community source of wealth in diasporic communities around the world. Thus, the Vancouver model, which is really the Macau model of underground banking using triad banks. And so, something very interesting I found, in my coverage of the evolution of understanding diasporic underground banking was, for some reason, the let's just say the powers that be in Canada, be they the banks, the government, the casino, government-controlled casinos, called this underground banking gray area or illicit, when what I'm arguing and saying is I don't think it can be gray area or illicit if you have triad brokers running it. And as my more current area of research shows, essentially what the CIA calls CCP Inc. is involved with, has co-opted, has interfered in these underground banking networks, and is really abetting these networks globally for strategic reasons. So to my point of how could the powers that be in Western countries call this gray area or illicit banking? I'll read you a brief finding from the Cullen Commission into Money Laundering that was triggered by my reporting. The government had to look at this. Is the Vancouver model really real? And Justice Cullen, in his report, wrote, in 2014 alone, British Columbia casinos accepted nearly 1.2 billion in cash transactions of 10,000 or more, including 1,800 individual cash buy-ins of 100,000 or more, an average of more than 5 per day. So that's 5 times per day in a British Columbia government casino. People were carrying in a duffel bag with at least $100,000. Justice Cullen went on to say, in addition to the extraordinary amounts, the cash used in many of these transactions exhibited well-known characteristics of cash derived from crime, often consisting predominantly of $20 bills bundled in bricks, bound in elastic bags, carried in shopping bags, suitcases, gym bags, cardboard boxes. The vast quantities delivered to casino patrons at or near casinos very late at night. So that's the Vancouver model of money laundering, proven in an independent government commission. This is happening at scale. And as my work evolved, I found that of course, the casinos really are the proverbial tip of the iceberg. That's not to say that they're going away. The casinos, I believe, probably as BC10 will be able to tell us even more fulsomely, are a favored method of the triads, because the triads, whether openly or semi-openly or clandestinely, I believe, have major ownership interests in casinos around the world. Certainly the junkets that service them through community banking. So to end my remarks, I will just say that COVID really was a very interesting time of evolution in the casino underground banking model. Again, focusing on Canada, I moved geographically to the eastern portion of Canada during that time, and that gave me more chance and visibility to look into Ontario and discover that in North America, perhaps while not as open or overt as the Vancouver model money laundering, it's perhaps deeper and more ingrained into the economy. An example was Canadians were shocked in 2020 to see that mansion casinos in the Toronto area of absurd proportions had essentially become open commercial operations operating in broad daylight while most of the community and society was following COVID restrictions, mansions owned by transnational, as I discovered, transnational organized crime with links to the Chinese Communist Party were running the Vancouver model money laundering. And very interestingly, they had tapped into cryptocurrency as a very key method of transaction, along with the cash that is uh, just the standard currency used in underground casinos. Finally, FinTrack, Canada's anti-money laundering watchdog, in 2023 came out with a very detailed operational alert. They studied something like 40,000 banking transactions and discovered that, again, the underground diaspora community banking had evolved to the point where during COVID, wire transfers from China and Hong Kong were again becoming a very key portion of the underground banking Vancouver model. That is, people were now, triad brokers were consigning students, unemployed persons, housewives within the diaspora community to open banking accounts, receive wire transfers, and these nominee or mule accounts would then be used to parcel off bank drafts, currencies bundled in a better way than bags of cash into professional money laundering networks and really into banking. And my last comment will be for the Bureau. Just this past week, I reported a story relying on testimony from a former senior DEA investigator who is asserting and alleging. I know most of our audience will know of the fines that TD Bank faces in the United States, upwards of about $4 billion. My DEA source, Dr. David Asher, says that command and control for the evolving fentanyl money laundering in North America, that is triad brokers laundering money for the Mexican cartels that are distributing fentanyl. The triad brokers are commanded from Toronto, and they're assigning international students from China to pick up bulk cash and deposit it into the banks. So my brief opening remarks, I think, show you a timeline and how the system is evolving.
Thanks, Sam. I just want to note that we have one comment stating that the NCA recently took down a Chinese gang in London using the same model of students being money mules. Now, BC, if I could turn to you, I'm really curious about your thoughts on this topic in terms of emerging threats linked to the casino and gaming sector. Have you seen anything in Southeast Asia that's similar to what Sam has mentioned?
Thanks, Alison, and thanks, RUSI, for obviously giving the attention on this topic. So from what I'm hearing from Sam, like the key words that pop in my head really is an illicit marketplace and how everybody is coming together and how you're almost democratizing some aspects of the many crimes that happen in those marketplaces. So just a little bit of background. I've worked on junkets or tracing how junkets interact many years ago. But more recently, I've taken, as you pointed out, a personal interest in the scamming compounds in Southeast Asia. So I spent 6 months trying to understand the threat landscape of these scamming compounds and operations in Southeast Asia. My investigation brought me to many corners of Southeast Asia, where I saw firsthand vibrant illicit marketplaces thriving in these pockets of Southeast Asia, and interestingly, often anchoring themselves around casinos and wider gaming facilities. I just want to maybe call out one report that was published in January this year by UNODC, discussing the confluence of casinos, money laundering, and transnational organized crime, specifically in the East and Southeast Asia region. And what I want to quote from there is that UNODC estimates something around 340 licensed and unlicensed casinos, predominantly in Southeast Asia. And I'll call out a few jurisdictions: Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, and certainly the Philippines as well has high concentrations of these licensed and unlicensed casinos. But both Malaysia and Singapore, I suppose, arguably higher, more regulated jurisdictions too have a long history of casinos operating. Certainly, if we broaden that, if you'll throw in Macau and other peripheral jurisdictions within Asia, I want to call out a few points and what I'm concerned about, what I'm worried about when we're discussing this topic. I think the first point I really want to stress out is that it's both unlicensed and licensed casinos. And really, for me, it's the question of how they interact with each other and the illicit marketplace that will evolve around these sort of two distinct types of operations. So really, the relationship between license and, we could argue, sub-licensed casinos, so a secondary gaming operation that works off the license of the primary holder by co-locating, that concerns me, because one person's accountable, whereas the other has less accountability or less oversight in terms of how they operate. So that certainly concerns me. Unlicensed casinos, as I've observed, that tend to be smaller functioning operations, and as an observation, they invariably will be found in medium to large gaming compounds. So those are completely unlicensed casinos operating at smaller scales. And the third thing that really concerns me, and I think that's really the crux of what we're discussing today, are the enablers. So the enablers that gravitate around these gambling economies, right? The junkets for sure, the investors, the gamers, the punters themselves, and they operate across, as we'll observe, both licensed and unlicensed casinos. So that's one aspect of it. And of course, to Sam's point, the money launderers today, the payment providers, the technology providers, certainly the online gaming operators and other peripheral businesses, they work across both unlicensed, licensed casinos, across jurisdictions, and across marketplaces. So these are not only enablers, but also connectors to these different pockets of marketplaces that might or might not be illicit, but nonetheless, they are connected by these enablers. As a final point, in Southeast Asia, in terms of casinos, in terms of gaming, interesting year, the Philippines have decided to ban POGOs as well as offshore gaming operations, as well as another sub-license called IGL, which is Internet Gaming License. So decided to ban it this year, and that should cease operations by end of this year. The verdict is still out, what's going to happen and how that market's going to evolve. Are they just going to go underground? Is it going to be more difficult for us to regulate? That's a question that needs to be answered, and obviously we need to manage our approach to this evolving situation. But also other jurisdictions in Asia, being Japan and Thailand, Japan probably closer to that realization, but both Japan and Thailand are working towards creating casino licenses for them to have a new casino business within their jurisdictions. So just a few points and a few observations that I'll share at this point.
Thanks, BC. Those are really good points. And I do think it's an interesting concept, really focusing in on the enablers. I do want to maybe shift gears a little bit into the proliferation finance side. Chandana, if you don't mind, I know that you have a ton of expertise on the designated non-financial businesses and professions side of things. Can you speak a little bit about how you have seen North Korea specifically abuse this sector? Just a few examples to give the audience an understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Firstly, I want to say this is a great opportunity to be around incredible experts like BC, Sam, and also Alison, and also to get a chance to speak a little bit about our paper. With respect to proliferation financing threats in this sector, I mean, the best way to do this is like how we go about during our technical assistance work, and that is to give a background by using case examples. But before that, I want to also try to set the scene by how proliferation financing actually works. So if we do a quick recall, In general, we understand proliferation financing as an act to provide funds or financial services that are either used in part or in whole for manufacturing, development, acquisition of WMDs and their delivery systems. However, this is not the only case. It's not always restricted to financial activities, and this could include non-financial businesses and professions. So the FATF defines a whole list of activities as non-financial businesses and professions. And when it comes to particularly North Korea exploiting this sector, it is more generally looked at in the form of a revenue raising activity. So if you were to consider the extensive reports of the UN panel of experts, for example, also CFS has built a very comprehensive database to analyze this information better. I would redirect everyone to our website to try read the whole extensive information of the UN panels much in a better way. But these resources basically highlight not just the financial activities, but also the non-financial activities that North Korea relies on when they have to generate revenue. And some of these are how they particularly lease property and get the raise revenue through rent money of property, also of sale and resale of luxury goods and shipment of luxury goods. And most of the time, we also see how they particularly exploit gatekeeper professions to establish fund companies, obtain operating licenses, and even obscure ownership information. In essence, what I'm trying to say is they use these non-financial businesses and professions, not just for generating revenue, but also to create complex layers. So as such, casino sector, which is also in this DNFBB group, also plays a very significant role in complicating this web of transactions by providing an additional layer to basically obfuscate the traceability of these funds. So, and what is more important is one of the core reasons as why this sector remains exploited is the vulnerability of it being exposed to proliferation financing, in addition to money laundering and terrorist financing, is due to poor regulation. And in some instances, this sector is often unregulated for anti-money laundering or other such provisions. More often, the risks are also with poor understanding of the risk or poor understanding of what proliferation financing. It's simply because there is very limited knowledge and there's a lack of awareness regarding who are the key players. And if there are certain players, what is their structure? What exactly are the risks and how to evaluate these risks? So keeping in mind these aspects around how casino sector is also a very vital profession when it comes to exploitation activities by North Korea. We identified certain potential avenues or open avenues that not just North Korea, but other illicit actors could possibly use this channel to obfuscate and generate funds. If I could just quickly say a few things, I'm not going to go and explain all the avenues that we have discovered, but we've been talking about this already. Like VC said, there are some keywords that is floating around right now. So one thing is the role of junket industries and junket enterprises. There's still not clear-cut information about what a junket, or there might be, but it's not entirely reliable in the sense that what is a junket? Who are all the key players in the junket? And there is no proper licensing or monitoring procedures, or there's a proper definition. So we've identified this particular avenue as one aspect. And when it comes to other aspects of North Korea's relation, we've also identified there is a historic relation with North Korean actors and organized crime groups. And like even modern day connections, there is a report that was released in 2023 by FT and in partnership with RUSI, which highlights the connection between a Macau junket operator and modern day oil smuggling operations in North Korea. So these are some aspects. Another one is underground banking. We did speak a little bit about it, but we can discuss much later around it. But another aspect is how recently the US and South Korean advisories released an advisory on North Korean IT companies and how they participate in very a variety of IT development work, including online gambling programs, etc. And they raise revenue out of it. So there is evidence to show that they get around $5,000 per website and $3,000 per maintenance of the website, etc. So these are some of the open activities or open avenues that jurisdictions and everyone needs to be thinking about and involving it in their risk assessment process. But this is the connection between North Korea, proliferation financing, and why the casino and gaming sector.
Thanks, Chandana. Those are really good points that you made. Sam, if you don't mind, I want to ask you this first, and BC, please do chime in afterwards if you have any additional thoughts. Sam, can you kind of provide attendees an understanding of what the scale of this activity is in terms of organized crime and the misuse of the casino and gaming sector? Do you think there's only a few countries out there that should be concerned about this, or do you think that other jurisdictions should be considering it? Oh, sorry, Sam, you're on mute.
There, sorry. I definitely think this is very much a global model. When I got into my research in Vancouver, I thought I was being, a little bit adventurous and aggressive when I saw enough data points and just anecdotally what I was seeing on the ground, real estate, how it was developing in Vancouver. I could estimate in about 10 years as the casino industry grew and as we saw, I understood through research that the major triads had set up around BC casinos in the late 90s, welcomed by the government in hindsight. I could estimate a couple $2 billion. So I was saying about 2 billion in 10 years, which seemed to me a big figure. And furthermore, I estimated if casinos were that, then these same networks were laundering tens of billions in Vancouver real estate, which it turns out those were very low, beyond conservative, just way too moderate. As I've said, 1.2 billion in bundled, duffel bags of cash into BC government casinos in 2014. Now, as I'm discovering in Canadian banking, fraudulent mortgages is a major business in Canada's big banks it's the same diaspora underground banking network. So now in Canadian real estate, same community banking, I'm saying hundreds of billions of dollars easily has been laundered into Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. And this is the same model that we see in Australia, in the major cities there. It's the same model we see in Italy now. It's the same model, as I've reported in the past week, that's developing in the United States. And yet it seems that the United States finally is the only government that's cracking down on these networks. And unfortunately for Canada, along with Australia, probably, Australia has cracked down on this method of organized crime. They have a lot of work to do. Canada hasn't really cracked down at all. It's not that we don't have good police officers. It's not that FinTrack doesn't see everything happening, but it's a matter of political will and laws in Canada to go after this global network. So if I'm saying hundreds of billions in Canada, which is certainly a node, this is trillions of dollars globally in this diasporic underground banking around the world. As we all know here, the South Pacific is a major target as well.
Thanks for that, Sam. BC, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to throw a bit of a contentious point out here. So, I mean, my view is that the landscape of organized crime has changed, and I feel that we've missed the mark on identifying how they've evolved, and particularly so for Asian organized crime. Again, I think what I'm trying to push forward is more of an illicit marketplace concept, and absolutely, who we would consider as traditional organized crime participants. I mean, they're very much participating in this new illicit marketplace, but they will be only one portion of it, and that marketplace is a lot bigger and a lot more diverse than just organized crime criminals. I obviously haven't interviewed everybody, but many of them who are involved in illicit activities when I asked them to describe themselves, if they would consider themselves an organized crime or criminals in the most polite way, most of them would just consider themselves as businessmen or opportunistic businessmen who have found an opportunity to make a pot of gold, to make some success out of it. Obviously, the method is irrelevant to them. It's just they've managed to do that. The marketplace has expanded a lot. You have, to Chanana's point, professionals who have come in, technologists, other aspiring entrepreneurs, and not limited to any jurisdiction, and not even limited to any ethnic group, although ethnicity comes with an element of trust. So you do see some concentrations here and there. So really, to me, it's about us identifying, getting a grasp on this new illicit marketplace that is global. Two other aspects of not limiting ourselves to just a jurisdiction. One would be, if the method works, it will be exported. So opportunists will always look for another jurisdiction of vulnerability. We see them in Southeast Asia, but I don't think the world has shortage of market economies who are vulnerable, or jurisdictions that are vulnerable. So if it doesn't work out in Southeast Asia, they will evolve, they will move, they will find a new place to thrive. So that's one aspect of it. The second international aspect of it is, like it or not, we are in a global economy, right? Even looking at the illicit fund flows, just taking scamming, for instance, the operations run out of Southeast Asia. The investors are from East Asia, perhaps, and the victims are anywhere in the world. And the profits may or may not flow back to Southeast Asia. They will be enjoyed anywhere in the world. So there's definitely an international aspect of it. No jurisdiction alone, great cops everywhere, but no jurisdiction alone will be able to address this effectively without cross-border cooperation.
BC, if you don't mind, there's one question in the chat that I think that you might also be the person to ask. This is specifically about Thailand possibly allowing casinos. Can you speak about potential strategies that Thailand can take if that is something that were to happen in terms of risk mitigation?
Ooh, that's a hard one. What about Singapore? What about Malaysia? We're all in the same region, and Thailand's a bit unique in the sense that it shares quite a few borders, and these borders are with Myanmar, obviously, from a security perspective, a challenge state, and other neighboring countries. So really having a good regulatory regime, having a right level of enforcement and oversight vis-a-vis with the casino operation, I think that's absolutely essential. It's not new in the region. There are models that they can build off. There are good advice that they could leverage on. So that's one. So that's only from the casino perspective. It's always the economy around it, the peripheral, the marketplace. And that's really when the law enforcement agencies as a whole do need to build additional competencies. And the competencies would be, you're not only dealing with one type of organized crime now, you're going to deal with a lot more types of organized crime. The ability to deal with a multitude of typologies, the capacity to deal with that would be one aspect. The intelligence functions of law enforcement would need to be beefed up as well. Again, that comes with the territory. Just because you have a casino somewhere in Southeast Asia doesn't mean your clients or even your partners would only come from specific jurisdictions. It will become very international overnight. Again, Thailand's it's a global tourist organization. It's not that they're not used to foreign cultures and foreign interactions with foreign law enforcement agencies, but it is something that they need to be aware with going into this with your eyes wide open.
Thanks for that, BC. I would just also be curious to hear Chandana's thoughts about risk mitigation strategies, because one of the other questions we have is speaking about how cryptocurrency fits into this process. And BC, you had mentioned the UNODC report earlier this year, but there have been reports about how some junkets that are licensed will have mentions of cryptocurrency foreign exchange rates on Telegram channels. So the scale of this activity, as far as I'm aware, is unknown, but my thought on the process is if it is something that is available, it will be misused. Cryptocurrency is used as a vehicle by criminal actors to move money, just because we are really far from getting to a consistent regulation process across the world. But in terms of actually looking into this, crypto has this benefit that it's traceable. So Chandana, if you can just share some thoughts around best practice for regulation of junkets and how cryptocurrency fits in, I would be really curious to hear that.
Yeah, sure, gladly. These are some of the things that we kind of identify during our research. So I think the best thing to do is start with the basics, and that is to identify what exactly are the threats and vulnerabilities that would be subject to each jurisdiction. I know we're discussing about how this is a global and international issue, but then it would also be useful for jurisdictions to also understand what is particularly the risk or vulnerability they would be facing and around the region, etc., to address this, especially, and also adapting a risk-based approach. So if there is involvement of cryptocurrency, that is a risk factor. So keeping that in mind would be the first step. And the next would be to investigate. So jurisdictions need to investigate if there are any cryptocurrency activities that is happening with casinos or junkets or the casino and the gaming industry in general. One way to do this would be for casino-related investigations. It might not be very obvious that cryptocurrency is used within casino industry. So the best way to do it is to work with blockchain analytic providers and tools. So in collaboration with them, etc. So just to ensure that there is a method to track incoming and outgoing transactions from different addresses within the casino and gaming industry. I must say that the industry is still cash intensive. We are seeing a lot of reports and publications that talk about how cryptocurrency is promoted as a payment or a payout option on social media, like the UNODC report that gave an example to this. But if cryptocurrency is actually used in casino and junkets, then there is an opportunity for insight into how junket operations work. So with that objective, that would be one way to go. Another thing is, one major vulnerability in the industry is that there is no proper licensing procedure or monitoring for customers that receive cryptocurrency directly in land-based casinos, for example. So maybe adding another additional feature of a licensing conditions for casinos that want to operate with cryptocurrency would be another way to go. So ideally, if there is a business model that says that cryptocurrency would be involved, then according to the risk-based approach, more attention need to be made on this factor and ensure it's not just about having a robust technology, but also to have a good understanding of what are the financial crime risks that comes with having this. Another thing would be was making conditions within licensing and monitoring procedure. I think it was the Isle of Man that made an additional licensing condition where they talked about certain permitted models of cryptocurrency, and the same with Moneyval that talked about how only certain permitted types of cryptocurrency can operate, and having transaction thresholds, or to ensure that blockchain analytical tools must be used to like identifying red flags, etc. So these are just some of the ways in which potentially jurisdictions could actually tackle if cryptocurrency is actually used within the casino and gaming industry.
Thanks for that, Chandana. Sam, there's a question that someone has asked that specifically has to do with Canada, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. In terms of casinos that within Canada that still may take dirty money. Is there something behind this? Is there an element of corruption? Can you provide some thoughts on that specifically?
Sure. This is this is a question that I think about a lot. I'm fascinated by the question, and I believe I'm getting closer to some very substantial answers. But I mean, first of all, it's a good thing to try to regulate these. You know, if we decide that casinos are going to be a part of our economy, of course we need to we need to get best practices. But it's an uphill struggle when you have very determined, as BC and Chandana say, it's not just, you know, the old school loan sharking triads anymore. The complexities around the economies, the online brokers developing around these businesses, it's moving so fast and it's so big. The ways to discern between you know, that street gangster that's dealing in cash, or the, you know, the international junket provider and all the web of tech operators around it is getting so difficult. But on Canada, it's a sensitive issue, but my research shows way back to the early 1990s at the highest levels, the triad gentlemen, and we don't have to say their names all today, but these are people investigated by the US government for working with North Korea. They're running banks in Hong Kong and Macau. Certainly, they have corrupted. I'm sad to say, I believe at a high level, bureaucrats in Canada. And then when we speak about modern day in Canada, I'm working on stories of prominent RCMP officers, or, you know, city police in Canada that have not just been corrupted by those trying to use underground banking and money laundering, but my point that I always harp on is I'm seeing it hand in hand with hostile state operators appear to be using these very high-end business-like businessmen who are really in the organized crime economy as corruptive influences. And so it just comes back to the old saying that, you know, when you're dealing with casinos, I do believe there's many examples around the world where the operators or the hidden investors will try to put lipstick on a pig, and they will hire a very prominent, you know, well-known organized crime investigator, financial crime investigator. That person will come in and maybe try to do a good job, but I believe all too often these former police officers are being corrupted. It's sad to say, and I'm working on stories right now that I think will show more about that in Canada and probably the United States.
Thanks, Sam, for that. There's one question that I want to figure out which speaker is best fit. Maybe I'll start with Chandana, if you don't mind. Chandana, there's a question here about the role of international cooperation and potentially doing some work throughout these international organizations such as the UN to actually dig into what's happening. Can you maybe provide your thoughts on the role of these international organizations in tackling some of this activity?
Yeah, gladly. I think when it comes to the role of international organizations, I think the first step that we have been doing right now is to actually talking about the problem. So the UNODC report, I think that was a first step in actually giving a broader picture as to what are all the different kinds of threats and predominantly threats that could occur in the casino and the gaming industry that could be used as a guide for a lot of countries to refer to understand and actually get an awareness of the issue. Having these kind of international organizations actually speak about this also provides an input for other organizations, for example, RUSI, like us, to also come up with these kind of reports and talk about these issues, but also identify certain nuances that make the threats much more important for jurisdictions to consider. I think more importantly, it provides an environment to come up with ideas to how to actually tackle and mitigate these issues. So For one way is to allow for ensuring there is proper communication channels that would allow for regional organizations and other international organizations to collaborate on certain issues, and ensure that there is involvement of private sector, public sector to report on these kind of certain illegal operations, and also allow for investments and certain aspect of putting more resources into understanding these threats and filling the gap which basically expertise in the law enforcement do not have at the moment when it comes to actually understanding the threat and the risks. So basically to evaluate the risks and allow for these organizations to ensure that it can be included in their risk assessment process, etc. So these are just some of my thoughts on that.
BC, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on the role of international cooperation, but specifically towards the use of similar laundering mechanisms like under-regulated casinos tied to the scam centers. Would you feel comfortable answering that question?
Maybe more broadly, just calling out that international cooperation is going to be key. Intelligence sharing amongst law enforcement agencies is key. You know, we've all broadly, hummed to the same tune, calling out how international these criminals are and how international these networks are. Again, back to the point, the casinos, and even just using casinos as an example. The casino is licensed by a third party. They are located in a facility somewhere, let's just arbitrarily say, Myanmar, right? But they have a great broadband network, and through another third proprietor who's now in the casino is streaming live gambling, live gaming, live gambling to a fourth jurisdiction, let's say Europe, right? So there's at least 4 or 5 countries or 4 or 5 nationalities involved. The money flows multiple ways. Again, without having competent law enforcement agencies trace the funds, share key intelligence around the perpetrators. And I'll argue even using the good old PPP, public-private partnership, throwing that into the mix, getting the banks involved to have more updated live financial intelligence. If we're not doing that, the criminals will always be faster. They will out-adapt us, and they will just find new ways to be successful.
Thanks, BC. That is interesting, and I really would emphasize that with this, international cooperation is necessary, and truly with the point that cryptocurrency can be used as a vehicle to transfer money. It is this element that allows investigation to be slightly easier if that is on-chain transfers, and not just physical transfers of hardware devices. I want to maybe focus in on this element of cryptocurrency being used in underground casinos. Sam, you mentioned this in the very beginning that you have seen this. Would you be able to provide a bit more detail on this?
Sure. This goes back to this incredible mansion casino in the Toronto area that was discovered by regional police in 2020. It's a 50-room mansion, completely opulent. It was running at a commercial level. There were body house functions, funding for all manners of organized crime. And as I'm continuing to discover, the networks involved, these should be related again to the current TD Bank case in North America. So we're talking about the command and control of the most dangerous and large triad networks, probably outside of mainland China, Hong Kong, and Macau, are centered in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. as the Australian police know, they're the jurisdiction that's actually, you know, in the lead in investigating. But what this mansion showed was they were operating a commercial casino at scale, you know, in the basement of the mansion while other things are going on in the rooms around the house. And they did have electronic cryptocurrency transaction functions. So I don't have total visibility or understanding on how large the scale of the cryptocurrency was being used, but I have some sense that just as we see now in reports from the Taiwanese government of state-sponsored crime using cryptocurrency to make payments to corrupted politicians, we've seen it in Europe as well. The Chinese are using that. So they're doing the same thing in casinos. I believe that is patrons will be encouraged to open up a crypto wallet. And whether it's at scale, you know, the casino has a bank or its own, you know, ICO. I'm not sure of that, but certainly the patrons are being encouraged to transfer funds internationally into the hands of casino operators that way. And I do believe, again, looking at a network type of investigative research, the people involved, again, I'm focusing on this illegal casino mansion in the Toronto area, which Canadian police and intelligence know quite a bit about. People in those networks, and I'm talking about CCP United Front networks involved with this casino, are also involved in blockchain technology companies in the Toronto area. So I do believe, you know, this is tying into the international use of students as money mules. It's tying into the triads. I believe it should be tying into, you know, the Broken Tooth Koi, who famously had an ICO Dragon Coin startup. It's telling me that the company that is these highest level syndicates of triads are very much using cryptocurrency along with the Chinese state in illicit operations as well.
Thanks for that, Sam. I do want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about next steps because we have quite a few individuals listening in right now from the public sector. So if I can, just starting with Chandana and going through everyone, can we just speak to what are the next steps? What should jurisdictions be doing? I'm interested in possible solutions to this problem. So Chandana, maybe can I start with you in answering that question and then BC next?
Sure, I can be brief as well. I think we're again speaking about a lot of different aspects of the casino and gaming industry, from junkets to underground casinos, etc. So if we were to just split that a little and just see how we can address each particular part. For the junket industry, for example, most of the time, one of the issues is it's very hard to find data to assess the significance of the activities with respect to jurisdictions. So one way is to expand resources. Jurisdictions need to expand their resources to analyze, suspicious transaction reports and not just stopping at the reports, but also discussing with the industry itself to talk about the risks, etc. I know we spoke about this already. Ensure there is robust regional and international cooperation. So when it comes to examining data to determine if a junket industry, for example, is active or not active, authority should also consider if there's any requests coming in. Law enforcement bodies should ensure that information is provided to ensure there's updated information about these kind of junket activities. When it comes to underground casinos, on the other side, there's a big problem when it comes to identifying what is the potential degree of ownership between who the facilitator is and who's actually running the operation. So it is important for jurisdictions to ensure there is proper communicational channels between private and public sector when it comes to actual reporting of certain suspicions or any kind of illegal operations. So another aspect would be to invest in human resource to fill in the gap that law enforcement lacks at the moment when it comes to expertise or to understand the risks that come with the casino and gaming industry. And also, since I've been speaking about the designated non-financial businesses and professions, I think one of the first things that needs to be done is to ensure that this group is under the AML regulatory regime. If it's not already done so, I think many jurisdictions should consider this as one of the first steps. And also to have a guidance to ensure there is clarity when it comes to documentation. That is to basically, I'm saying that there needs to be robust due diligence methodologies and know your customer documentations to ensure there's updated information with this aspect. I just have one more point when it comes to cryptocurrency in this aspect. So if there is I did mention a little bit about this before, but when it comes to cryptocurrency involvement, I think one way for jurisdictions to start looking in the first would be to work with or use blockchain analytical tools to actually track transactions or trace the transactions as a starting point.
Thanks, Chandana. BC, do you have any thoughts to add on that in terms of possible solutions?
I'm not known for straight answers. I'm trying very hard today, but I will give it a good attempt. Just to call out a few things. So I completely agree with Chandana on the regulatory uplift for DNFPBs, specifically on the casinos. But the three others that I guess are a bit more unique from my perspective. So number one, I've called this out previously, but intelligence sharing is key. Definitely across jurisdictions, but I would argue with the NGOs working on the ground, with financial institutions, I think we're in a us against them situation, and I like the us to be a bigger number. So I think there's a lot more competencies and knowledge with the us that we need to harness. We need to understand the evolving landscape. As I've mentioned, I think we've missed the mark on identifying this trend. So that's one I'll call out. The second I'll call out is we need to support vulnerable states, and this is to the whole extent of the economics, the institution, the all aspects of it. If we run on this scenario, if we manage to nip them in the butt in a few jurisdictions in Southeast Asia, they will find a new jurisdiction to operate out of. So we're talking about capacity building. We're talking about how to help them manage corruption, regulatory oversight, all those capabilities. There's one hand, all of us in high capacity jurisdictions protecting ourselves, but it will be the vulnerable states which we left and hung out to dry. So that's my second one. And the third one, very, 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 very basically, it's a bit loaded, but let's not let politics get in the way of just good cross-border policing. Right? Unfortunately, I see that sort of a case as well. There's so many opportunities for us to fight crime together. I'll love to keep politics out of it. Again, idealistic, but yeah.
Sam, do you want to jump in and provide some final thoughts on that as well?
Sure. Chandana and BC made the right points, especially in Canada. I am seeing that the United States and Australia have great frustration that Canada is being used by these networks to send fentanyl, to launder money, because Canadian courts and the Canadian government really isn't participating in international law enforcement anymore. So the thought that came to mind from BC's point was, look, these criminals are not respecting our borders. They're using our countries transnationally. Maybe we need international courts to step up, and we need much more, cross-border law enforcement, joint task force. And I would say, I'd advocate right now, Canada should participate in something like an international court, because the problem is getting out of control, certainly in my home country.
Thanks for that, Sam. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for the webinar today. I do see that there are lots of questions that I haven't been able to get to. I would say please do feel welcome to reach out to the Center for Finance and Security at cfs@rusi.org. We will make sure to get you in contact with any expert that you deem is necessary. So whether that be Chandana, Sam, or BC, we will make sure to get you in contact to get the right answers to your questions. I want to just mention that please do go to rusi.org/CFS to keep up with research on this topic, as well as comprehensive research on other areas for financial crime. Thank you so much to all of our panelists here today. It really was a great conversation. And what I really get from this is this needs to be a regularly occurring conversation, because illicit actors do continuously stay one step ahead. And with this area, this emerging marketplace with cryptocurrency integration, it really seems like it needs to be a key area where we're putting resources. So I will end there. Thank you to all of our attendees who joined this conversation to listen in as well. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.